Dr. Wes Robins. I feel like that's a really cool way to start this because we've known each other for a minute now. Um, Never met in person. That's on my list. It's on my
Yeah.
list. But welcome to Hope again with this newly minted doctor. What do you call it? Is it a doctorship?
So I just,
I don't know what you call it.
it feels funky to hear it, but it was so funny, Brenda, because it's a PhD and I guess doctoral degree, but there's several different people that will get a PhD and some will choose to put the doctor in front of their name. Others will choose to use their name and then a comma PhD. And
Correct.
I was always going back and forth on which one I'm going to do. And then literally as soon as I graduated, I was like, I'm using doctor.
I 100% would do that. I'll tell you just a funny story. When I was in 8th grade, somebody called our house and said, "May I speak to Dr. Wagner?" Which is my maiden name. And I said, "Oh, you must have the wrong number because my dad's a professor." And I hung up. Like
Yeah.
I had no idea. Dad was like a doctor. So I get it.
Yeah.
Like the whole PhD thing it's a little confusing.
Yes. And my daughters remind me all the time that I am not necessarily a traditional medical doctor.
Yes.
Rather, yes, I have a doctoral degree.
Very important distinction in
Yes.
those two roles.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that we're talking today. It's been my intention was to go back and re-listen to a little bit of what we recorded the first time, which I want to say was in 2020, but I don't know. I could be wrong because it's all a blur. But I know that you've come a long way since then. Eternal Strength is coming up on 3 years, right? Your program, and so I thought it was a good time to check in, see what you're seeing on the ground. Maybe talk about kind of what we're both seeing on the ground and just see what's happening. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to know your is it a dissertation? Is that
Yes.
okay?
Yep.
I should know these things.
No, and they use it interchangeably. Dissertation, thesis,
Okay.
the
All
big
right.
exhaustive capstone project you must do to receive the degree.
Yes. Okay. So I know that you had the beginning of the title of yours was The Hand of Addiction. And then there was a second part, which I didn't totally understand. So maybe we just start there. Like, what is it that you were really diving into? And what made you so passionate? Because a PhD is a ton of work. And I'm wondering what made you so passionate about exploring that topic.
Yeah. Brenda and you'll have to stop me because I love talking about this. It was a passion that one, because my mom has her master's in behavioral analysis. My grandmother has her EDD in psychology and was the assistant dean at Charleston Southern University for years. So it felt really cool to carry that torch, this strong maternal lineage. And so I knew I wanted to get my PhD. And when I started to look, I was going to do a PhD in clinical or counseling psychology, looked at several programs. But when I found the University of West Georgia, I knew that's where I needed to be. And this is a PhD in consciousness and society. And it's really unique. It focuses on critical psychologies, humanistic psychologies, and transpersonal psychologies. And so it was beautiful and eclectic. Um, and as I started to do the work, all these unique classes on consciousness, on culture and subjectivity, on Buddhist psychologies, really just depth psychotherapy, a lot of unique study. And I knew I was going to do it on addiction
Nice.
because of the personal experience I'd had with addiction from the years of 17 to 23, where, marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, 3 arrests, emotional turmoil, fallout with my family. I'd hurtled through that, had this beautiful cathartic awakening, moved away from all these destructive behaviors. I was already a licensed professional counselor um, in private practice. And so finding the PhD was really a beautiful kind of rounding out of that. And so as I started to study addiction, I met Dr. Kathleen Scott Meyer, and she introduced me to a methodology called autoethnography. And she said, you can,
That's what I couldn't understand.
okay.
That was the second part that I was like, "Well, we're gonna have to talk about this."
And yeah, so and I did the same thing. I was like, well, what's that? And she was like, well, ethnography is a socio-cultural study birthed out of the field of anthropology. And so, when you think about ethnography, it's just a cultural study. So you and I hop on a plane and we go to Papua New Guinea and we live with the tribe and we write about it and we study the culture in the tribe. The auto component is we would begin to write about our own personal lived experience of what doing that research was like.
Got it.
So it was this really depth. So I went and studied addiction and wrote an autoethnographic exploration of my own personal lived experience of addiction and weaving that in with all the theories on addiction, all the research, all the literature, all the treatment, and constantly bringing it back to, did it land with my own personal lived experience? And so the title is The Hand of Addiction, an autoethnographic and transcontextual becoming. And I basically, yeah, it was beautiful. It was one of the most proudest things I've ever done and written. And I still read over it and I'm like, wow, I'm very, very proud of how it changed me in my exploration, how this journey of going into and exploring how addiction arose for me, my early childhood development and growth, my risk taking, sensation seeking, impulsivity, and learning as much as I could, but then also really understanding in a holistic way the entire field and how they conceptualize addiction, how they define it, and what they do in terms of prevention, intervention, treatment, continuum of care. And so it was just immersive.
That sounds super meta because you're, like, going back and looking at what you did and how you live, but also through a different lens of, like, how is this entire I'm just gonna call it an industry or field, then treating the people or not that
Yeah.
were you. So that's super like, I can see how that would be pretty crazy. Um, as much as you would wanna share, what did you find when you went back? Because I think from a parent standpoint, we're so mystified by our young people who are struggling. We're completely mystified and scared of the whole industry that is there to help treat them because we don't understand it. So, what I'm wondering about is when you kind of traveled back through this journey, is what you saw, did it compute? Like, were you seeing, okay, I was going through this, I was doing this, and here were these different resources. Did they see you? Did they see the West that you needed them to see? Or was it a mismatch? Am I making sense?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
you're making so much sense. The biggest epiphany for me was the standard developmental and traditional psychological and psychoanalytic models of understanding addiction didn't resonate.
Right.
What resonated for me was these fringe theorists, Gregory Bateson and these French philosophers, Deleuze and Guattari, and how they mapped and watched certain things. So rather than defining addiction, by the time I got done writing this, addiction had a completely different meaning to me. And I no longer saw addiction as an inherently negative, but I saw it as this powerful energy that always flowed through me, but I didn't know how to wield it and I had no idea how to channel it.
Yeah.
And so when I hear the word addiction now, it doesn't ever feel shameful. It doesn't ever feel negative. And I could get all heady and academic and break down, different types of addiction. But for me, it was an embracing of a portion of me that was lost And so one of the last things that I write is I was once addiction lost and now I am addiction found. And I
Wow.
think, yeah, understanding that it was this powerful tool and this flow and flux of energy. So a lot of insights into myself and a lot of letting go of shame.
So here's a question that I am really curious about is you didn't connect with the kind of traditional treatment approaches or theories around addiction. You said that you really identified with a little bit more of these fringe. I don't know if we should even call them fringe, but let's just call them that for now.
Yeah, yeah,
And I wonder, as parents, first of all, I think one thing is we don't know what's out there because until you're in this world, you don't even know this world exists, right? So, first of all, you get plopped into this world where you're like, I feel like I'm in a movie because this can't be happening in my family or my house or whatever. You start looking, everybody goes to Google, right? You start Googling, what do I do for a kid who's misusing drugs or addicted or whatever? And you're going to just find the typical for the most part, you're going to find the typical standard in the box treatment programs. And then if you see something that's a little bit outside of that, which I would say if I looked at the Eternal Strength website, I'd go, okay, that's different. Like that doesn't have the corporate red, blue, yellow, green, little guys, clip art guys.
right, right.
Um, and I would just wonder if we sometimes underestimate our kids' ability to connect with some of these deeper level thinking approaches or, like you're talking about the autoethnographic and transcontextual, and that can seem really intimidating until somebody like you breaks it down. It's like, okay, well, that makes sense. It's just words.
Yeah,
Do we underestimate our kids' ability to grasp some of these things and find their own way out of addiction? Because we're just trying to put them in the 30-day box, like, "Here's what my insurance will pay for. It's 30 days and an outpatient, da 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 da." I mean, I just
yeah.
have to believe that we're almost doing a little bit of a disservice to our kids when we don't look into some things that might be a little bit more exploratory.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you're spot on, and I have a lot of empathy for the parents because I don't think there's a lot of alternative spaces of treatment that even exist. So even if you are like, okay, I'm open to it, let me look at some different sacred, safe places that might be able to help work with my child that's struggling with addiction. There's not much in existence. And so that's where I'm fighting diligently to grow and create more of those spaces in due time. But I think overall we underestimate young people's ability to comprehend really, really complex things. And I think it's, when I talk about radical youth work, which is this methodology that we utilize, inherently embedded in it is a flattening of hierarchy. The ability for an older individual or an adult to meet hand in hand and have a mutual liberation, mutual respect for that young person, and really be inquisitive about their inner world and their lived experience and their thoughts
Right.
on culture and society. And so, yeah, I think, for me, it's one of the best things that you can ever do for a young person is to see their light, especially when you see addiction tied so much to shame and insecurity and low self worth that if you can come in and you can see that light in that young person and say, I see your beauty, I see your strength, and actually, I don't think you're broken. I don't think you're diseased. I think you are lost and struggling, but I think you're strong and you have this ability to course correct. And that's where I think, I always view addiction like a sword. It's this powerful, powerful energy and force. Unwielded, you harm yourself and you harm others. Wielded, some of the most insanely successful, holistically healthy individuals I've ever met are addicts. And they've learned and they've channeled and they've grown. I mean, the sinner wouldn't exist If I wasn't an addict, I'd be like, I'm done working.
Right.
You know, but that like that relentless fixation and obsession, which oftentimes only gets seen as a negative,
Right.
as a beauty within it when each person can understand it. And so I think that self depth and understanding of oneself. But the only way a young person gets there is if somebody gives a shit enough to actually be curious about who they are. But young people are going into programs and programs are already telling them, I already know who you are. You're an addict and you're using for these reasons and you have this and here is the treatment and the thing that's going to help. And I think young people are seeking something that's more individualized. And when we stop and go, whoa, whoa, who are you? Yeah, okay, you got all these things going on that I could easily compartmentalize and conceptualize you, but what's your soul? What's going on for you? Now we move past a theoretical understanding of addiction that may be biochemical, psychological, sociocultural, developmental. It's like, what about that person? What's going on for them in their internal narrative that's creating that how addiction is manifesting for them uniquely.
Yeah. It reminded me when you were talking about that, as I think there's now a tendency to look at things like, and I know you have a daughter on the spectrum, and I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of the narrative that I'm hearing is, whoa, wait, that's my superpower. That's not a deficit or ADD or one of those, right? And so I think that conversation is starting to shift to say, it's different and it's my superpower. And I wonder if, because when you were just talking about addiction, it and your own too, it felt like that, like, okay, the way I was playing out this addiction was destructive and chaotic and not great. If I can take that and turn it into channel it in a different way, that can be my superpower. So what I was hearing you say is like if you're sitting across from a kid and you see and they're they're struggling with addiction, it's like you are looking at, oh wait, dude, this is actually a good thing. We just need to tweak it. Is that am I
Yes.
just like
Yes.
overstating that?
No, 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 no. Brenda, you're spot on. And I would even go a step further and I would say everything is simply potentiality. So it's what I would call molecular. And I would say that it has the capacity to become a superpower or to fold in on itself and become destructive. And that's anything. That's any diagnostic pathology. That's any deficit. Everything is going to have its liabilities and its deficits and its weaknesses, and simultaneously have the potentiality that, if wielded correctly, could be one of the greatest strengths ever. But I think that moves us away from the narrative of, I don't, because I don't want to polarize. It's not like addiction is only a superpower. It's like, at any point in time, it's that person and how they're relating to their autism spectrum, their ADHD, their bipolar, their addiction, the facets, the multiplistic facets of self and how you're seeing and relating to it. But I love sitting it in this molecular space of it could become rigid and dark and fold in on itself, or it could also open up to a beautiful line of flight that could be a superpower. How are you going to use this thing that is a facet of you? And that's that empowerment piece of like, especially for youth, like you get to choose how you use any of these things.
Do you find that when you have that conversation, I'm just so wishing I would have been able to have a conversation like this with my son because I was not aware. When you have that conversation with a young person, what is their reaction to that? And because I can imagine, but then I can also imagine alternatives. So I want to hear first of all, like, what are you seeing when you're sitting across on the couch or out in the backyard playing ball or whatever you're doing?
Yeah. Or riding a one wheel through the center or doing stuff
Yes.
crazy. But I'm in a unique position because I'm not that kid's parent. And so I get
Yes.
to have this beautiful space with them where I'm a different entity. And so what I see is I see But, as a therapist, it's another hierarchical role.
Yeah.
If not done correctly,
Yeah.
with a lot of mutual respect, they'll just see me as a parental figure. And so when I do it right and I do it correctly and I do it from a heart space, it's ultimate freedom. They kind of, any resistance melts and they go, wow, this person's telling me I have ultimate free will, and they're not critiquing or judging or agenda based, trying to behaviorally condition me. They're just talking to me.
Yeah.
And so I see a unique sacred space begin to open up where now young people can be free to say, well, let me ask you, what do you think about this? Because as soon as we shift from you don't need to do this behavior anymore and you need to do this, if we stay there, young people shut down. But if we open up and you go, look, you're your own human being, you have ultimate free will, and you're the only person in this world that can control your emotions or your behaviors. Once we kind of acknowledge that truth, then I see young people start to open up and become more inquisitive. And now the energy shifts. And it's like, well, all right, we're not going to argue about what I can or can't do. You've just named that I have individual sovereignty over myself. Now let me talk to you about, like, well, what do you think about this? And now we start to explore together. We're both putting on backpacks and we're going trekking together through psychoeducation, through the world, through society, through culture. And I do think that parents have the capacity to do that with their children. It's just a lot fucking harder.
It's so hard. It's so
Because I don't want to put a backpack on
right.
and go do that traversing with my two daughters. I don't want them to travel certain places.
Right.
I want, I don't want, I don't want to acknowledge that they have free will. I want to protect them. I want to love them. I want to care for them. I want to condition their behavior. So now, you put me in my dad role, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. Don't tell them they got free will, because they don't, and then, and yeah. And so it just becomes, but, and that's where I love Shafali's work. Yeah, you become a conscious enough parent, you stop fighting what this inherent truth is, and you just start to work on yourself as a way to say, I'm just going to try and connect with my kid as much as I can. Relationship, relationship, relationship.
Yeah. And if we haven't been having that kind of a relationship, which I imagine a lot of people who are listening are like, well, what in the world is he talking about? And like, how would I even start to have that conversation? Because if you've been in that typical hierarchical parent child relationship, it's awkward and uncomfortable to start to shift that, right? It's like, I don't even know what words I would use. Have you seen parents be able to successfully, and I'm thinking specifically when you have a kid who's struggling in addiction, so you're like your feet are in the fire and you are freaking out and you're like, I got to do something with this kid or they're going to overdose on fentanyl or they're going to end up in jail or they're going to end up dead, which in a way to me is kind of like the perfect scenario because it forces you to do it. It's like jumping out of the plane if you're going
Yeah.
parachuting. 'Cause you don't have time to wait, but have you seen parents be able to have that make that shift to where they can sit and say, "Hey, what's going on with you?" Or I can't remember what words you used, it was much, much better. Um, can we do that as parents, or do we need to say, "Hey, I think there's somebody who could help you," and then really engage a professional?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, my immediate first thought was I've seen parents do it when they're finally at a space where they start to care for themselves and let go of trying to behaviorally control. And I've seen them do it for themselves to kind of free themselves up to say, I'm going to relate to my kid different because I'm beginning to work on my own spiritual holistic growth and relate to myself different.
Right.
Like, and then I think young people feel that, because any type of performative, you know, a parent throwing on a backwards hat and a skateboard and being like, hey, let's just hang, It's not real, man. But when a young person feels like it's real and they feel a real shift in their mom or their dad, I mean, I know I felt it, you know, I felt when my mom and my dad were hanging on my every hour
Yeah.
of existence, on my everything. I knew, and it was that was inherently um killing me in certain ways because I tried to escape even more. I
Yeah.
I saw how much I was hurting and destroying them, and I just wanted them to leave me the fuck alone and stop loving me, stop caring for me.
Right.
You know, like, let me, but the more they clung, the more I went, I'm going to show you, you can't control me. You can't cling to me. So it did this weird paradoxical kind of thing. Whereas when they finally got exhausted and stepped back and said, look, Wes, if you get arrested again, we love you, but we're not going to bail you out. You know, it was my third arrest. And they were just like, and they started to care for themselves and they started to be these stable structures of emotional stability, regardless of where I was. And there I am, 20 years old, using methamphetamine and cocaine and staying out for weeks at a time. But I felt the energy shift
Yeah.
where they just went, we can't stop this, but we can set these really firm boundaries and we're not going to participate in it. And we're not going to be riddled by it
Right.
anymore. But I never once did I question the love. I knew they loved me. I would use it as a manipulative tactic. I would absolutely be like, you don't love me because if you loved me, there's no way you'd let me go do this.
Right.
And they, you know, we all had to come to that reality that I always had free will. They could never stop me from doing any of it, no matter what they did. But young people, I think we'll just use that in creative and unique ways. And when you're in that space of severe rigidity of drug abuse, everybody becomes you know, everybody is just something to hurdle around. It's getting in the way of the thing that you need to get a hold of.
Right.
And, you know, I think that's where parents can absolutely, and this is the hardest part, Brenda, and you know this, but it's like severing, you know, any enabling. It has to be this really firm boundary. And that's where I think it's, you know, that's the greatest gift of love that you could ever give your child. My parents said, we love you. We're not giving you a car. We love you. You can't have any money. We love you. We're not going to give you a cell phone. You cannot stay at our home. If you would like to go meet for dinner, we'll meet you and we'll have dinner with you. You want to go grab a coffee? Great. We're always here. We'll always pick up the phone. But while you're making these really severely unhealthy, risk taking choices that are self destructive, the only thing we have any control over is the stuff we provide you with. And if we put it in your hands, we feel like we're contributing to it, we're pulling back. But hey, you want to go into a treatment, you want to go into a sober living, we see that you're clean and you're making healthy choices. It begins to open a door for us where if we know you're safe, we'll talk about maybe what it would look like to help you get a car, to help you get your own apartment, to help you get. And so I think it's very hard. You know, I don't know how my parents did it, but I do know that when they did it, it was absolutely what I needed.
Right. Well, you are absolutely speaking my language, and I love hearing it from the mouth of somebody who lived it because when I say those things, I think it doesn't hold the same amount of credibility. But I heard the same things from my son. I hear the same thing on this podcast all the time. And I think the true fear from parents is they are not going to love me. They're afraid of the repercussions of holding those boundaries, of what emotional outburst there's going to be, or even just the practical, well, now he's not going to have anywhere to live. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just have to be able to get there, which is so difficult, and I know we both believe in the power of community and not doing that alone because I did it alone, and it almost killed me physically, mentally, spiritually, everything, and so I think the only way to get through that really difficult job of holding boundaries is to lock arms with other parents who are doing it,
Yeah,
veterans who have been there, and say, "You can do this. You really can do this."
absolutely. And this will be my greatest test will be,
Mm.
can all the ways that I preach to all these parents, I do all this growth work, can I do that as a father myself?
Yeah.
Um, and it's really hard, but I think once you see it, and like you said, you see it on the podcast, you see it everywhere, you kind of start to know, like, yeah, that's it. That's what I have to do that is in the best interest and the greatest good of my child, myself, and my family. And of course, there's all these little nuances in between. Um, but it's definitely just moving towards taking your life back, taking care of yourself, and not deluding yourself with the fact that if you hold your breath, fixate on your child, and try every which way that you could control and stop their behavior, that you're going to be able to do it. It's like you got to come to that passive acceptance where you go, an element of this is my child has to do this because there's no parent on this earth that can behaviorally control their child for any sustainable period, and that young person has to get it from within at some point, and that's the scariest thing.
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna let you go get to those beautiful girls, give
Awesome.
them hugs, and we will make sure that we get links and everything, in the show notes to Eternal Strength and the work that you're doing. And thank you for
Yes, you
sharing
can
with
put up a
me.
link to my 165-page dissertation
I
that I
will.
know everybody is super excited to read
I
in depth.
actually am excited to read
Okay,
it.
freaking
I'm a
not
little bit
bad.
of a nerd that way, but I am excited to read it.
Brenda, thank you for what you do. Thank you
Yes.
for the Hope Stream community
Yes.
and everything you do to create community support. And I can't wait to talk again soon.
Me too. Look forward to it. Have a good rest of
Awesome.
your day.
Okay, bye.